My name's Feehan, and I'd like to read you my short story, which is called The Kill. The heavy branches of the baobab tree shaded Tambu as he crouched, still as a shadow at noon, observing his prey. He had no need of shelter from the searing heat, but the dappling shadows would trick the eye of any animal that might chance to look in his direction. Despite the 10-mile trek, his breath made no sound and didn't disturb the hot, still air. His legs were folded easily beneath him, poised to launch him in any direction at a second's notice. His bow hung taut and ready over his back. His hunting spear lay in his right hand. He had honed the blade many times on the black stone near the riverbed, and it could slice through tough hide and thick muscle without being diverted from its deadly course. He rolled it back and forth between thumb and palm in habit born of decades. He remembered his father showing him the tree from which it had been cut, and he offered a silent prayer to the spirits for this gift. The shaft was straight and true, polished smooth by years of use, and it would fly swift and hard. He lifted a pinch of soil and rubbed it in his left palm, testing it for moisture, then let it dribble and drift onto the dun earth. He watched its path as it fell almost straight down, diverted only slightly by the whispering air. The ancestors were looking with favour on him today. As he lifted his eyes to observe the herd, the faintest of breezes blew into his face, bringing with it the fierce scent of the kudu. Before leaving the village 2 days earlier, Tambu had painted his body with a paste of crushed berries, yellow mud and saliva, before performing the ritual dance with the other men, thumping the ground with their feet as they mined the kill. He was confident that the hunt would be a success, but he also knew from bitter experience that the ancestors were fickle, and even when a hunt was successful, men could die. Yes, this also he knew. His whole body and spirit were focused on the animal. He had tracked it for 2 days, the size and depth of its prints revealing to his sharp eyes its age. And now that he watched it as it drank from the waterhole, he knew he had read the signs correctly. The animal was a proud-looking beast. Its coat glistened with health, the eyes alert and defiant. Its horns curled out viciously from the massive head, long and sharp and deadly. It would make a worthy opponent, an honourable kill. He had tracked and killed many kudu, but today's hunt was important to him. He let his mind go blank to imagine what the beast might be thinking. His father had taught him this over many hunts. The sounds of the savannah became muffled. The shapes and colours of the landscape became vague and shadowy. He was no longer aware of the sharp, dry grass or the tree that sheltered him. He was now in that alert, yet trance-like state that would let him become as one with the beast. His feet, his hands, his whole body did not move, but his mind reached across the parched gap and joined with that of the animal. His body became cold, his mind clear as a lake. His eyes misted over, and then, suddenly, he was observing himself through the eyes of the kudu. He was hearing the noises of the birds and insects with its ears. He was sniffing the air for predators with the snout of the animal. He saw himself watching the animal, and he was content. He saw his comrades as they crouched silently nearby. He saw some way beyond the group, Malvo, who had been set to watch for lions or other predators who might steal their kill, or worse. Tambu had spotted lion tracks crossing the trail of the kudu herd and knew by the droppings that the huge beasts were not far away. His eyesight was a thing of legend among the tribe, far sharper than anyone else's, and he thought he saw, some way behind Malvo, a brown shape slink forward through the waist-high grass, the flick of a black-tipped tail. He felt the kudu tense, his heart leapt. He looked again, but the shape was gone. The kudu relaxed again, and he left it and was once more in his own body. High above in the tree he heard the birds chattering. The kudu paused in its drinking and lifted its head, probing the air for any hint of danger. Tambu stilled himself, his breath waiting patiently in his chest. He detected a faint sound behind him where he had posted Malvo, but the noise was not repeated. The kudu lowered its head and resumed its drinking, and Tambu released his breath. High overhead, a lone vulture slanted through the rock-still air. The bird tilted a wing towards the kudu, perhaps staking its claim, sensing what lay ahead, and the air seemed to shimmer with expectation. Tambu's feet were as one with the ground, the leathery soles and narrowed toes clutching the world like the hawk holds its prey. The events of the next few minutes were under his control. In some part of his mind, he was aware of the razor glass slicing and jabbing into his thighs, and the crimson scar beetles crawling over his calves, searching out the cuts made by the thorn bushes that morning. But there was no pain or discomfort. His whole mind and body were focused and targeted, like an arrow resting on a drawn string. With his companions he had tracked the herd for 2 days, and finally the animals had stopped at a waterhole. There were 10 beasts in the group, and he studied his prey as it lifted its proud head once more. He had selected the large male kudu, the leader. Countless generations of ancestors had prepared him for moments such as these. Nights by the campfire had schooled him in what to look for, what to listen for. He could identify each animal by its own distinct smell and could assess each one's strength, its health, and its value as food, and he knew that he had chosen well. He turned his head to study the men who accompanied him. They sat, 5 of them, in a rough semicircle within a few feet of each other. No word had passed between them since the sun had risen that morning. They communicated by short jabbing gestures, the sweep of a hand, the lifting of a chin, the raising of an eyebrow, the occasional rough picture traced in the soil. This was all they needed, all they allowed to share their thoughts and make their plans, to ensure that when Tambu gave the signal, they would move as one. He had hunted with each of these men many times and knew the character of each one, each line on their faces, and every one of the many scars they proudly bore. He trusted each of these 5 with his life. 30 yards away, Malvo kept his silent, solitary guard. The insects of the savannah clicked and buzzed and sniped around them, but Tambu detected, a little way beyond Malvo, another sound. His hearing, like his eyesight, was a gift from his ancestors, and none of his companions showed any sign of having heard the noise. The kudu continued to browse on the sparse acacia leaves, raising its head every few moments, turning it this way and that, testing the air for danger. The rest of the herd watched it intently, ready to follow its lead if it should bark a warning. The kudu had many predators, and Tambu's senses were alive to the dangers that surrounded them. Not just the mighty lion, but the tireless wild dog and the merciless cold-hide hyena. Any of these could take a kudu or a man for its prey. He knew the kudu itself could kill him with horns, hooves or head. From bitter memory he knew that even wounded it was a deadly prey. But he saw and heard nothing that threatened his prize, and he offered a silent blessing to the ancestors. Tambu would be honoured with the first cut of the beast's liver. From the animal's skin his wife would make a new bag for his arrows, and from the horns she would fashion a hunting knife for Tambu and a birth anklet for little Tala, the joy of his life. But there was more to the hunt than meat, more than an arrow bag or an anklet. Each time he hunted a kudu, Tambu dedicated it to the memory of his son Talu, killed by a kudu in a hunt 3 years earlier, and every time he fired an arrow into the neck of a kudu, Tambu saw himself firing it into the heart of Malvo, the man who had led that hunt and caused Talu's death. For months afterwards, each night in his hut, Tambu had wrapped himself in a cold cloak of despair and nursed the thorn of vengeance in his heart. He came back to the present as the kudu shifted position to reach a fresh bunch of leaves. It became almost invisible, its fawn pelt blending with the dry grass and earth. The hunting party sat like rocks, awaiting the moment, the signal that would come only from Tambu. He heard once more the faint noise to his rear. His head swivelled in that direction, and his sharp eyes saw a blade of grass bend towards Malvo. The kudu paused for a moment, but continued eating, and Tambu knew the time was near. He eased a poison beetle arrow from his pouch and checked his bow and spear. He had to get closer to be sure of the kill, and in these last few steps the hunt would be won or lost. Tambu remembered his father's words, "Move like you are walking past a nest of fire ants." He let his breath trickle from his lips, and a moment later the group oozed forward like the morning mist rolling across the lake. He was within 20 yards of his prey. The others were as one with him, but it was his honour and his responsibility to make the first strike. There was no sound of alert from Malvo. Tambu fitted the arrow to his bow and let his arm draw the string back. Suddenly the kudu froze. Something had alerted it. The slightest mistake now could send it off running. Tambu was still. He became part of the land. The energy of the earth surged through the soles of his feet, and he was like a tree growing from the brown soil, so that if the kudu should look in his direction, it would see leaves and branches, not a man. He let his eyes drift over the rest of the hunting party. They were as still as boulders. As his gaze carried to Malvo, 50 yards away, Tambu spotted the movement behind the man, a flash of sinuous brown as the grass parted, the merest yellow glint of the predator's eye. A grim joy flashed through Tambu's heart. He turned back and took aim. As he watched his arrow fly swift and true, the bowstring whipped back, whispering the name of his son, Talu. The barbed head sunk deep into the kudu's neck, releasing its poison. Tambu surged forward, spear poised, and in that instant he heard from behind him Malvo's harsh scream as the lion made its kill.